see everyone here. Those of you who were not here last night, I just want to tell you, we had the most amazing opening. We were so concerned that we weren't sure how people were going to receive this amazing experiment that we're doing in incorporating the arts into very serious work. But it really was amazing. I was especially watching the men who have a little harder time with some of this stuff. And I don't think we lost anyone. So I'm very pleased to present to you the second day of our 4th annual Slow Living Summit. And we have Eugene Friesen here, the world-renowned celloist. For those of you who don't know, Eugene actually lives in Townsend. And what was it, 5 years ago? 5 years ago, I called Eugene and politely asked him if he would help with our agricultural microloan that we started. It was the first ever microloan in the United States for agriculture. And hands down, he said, sure. And he will bring the Paul Winter Consort with him. And they ended up doing 2 concerts to benefit our agriculture microloan, which, by the way, is now sustainable, independent, and is in many banks in the New England area. So we're very proud of it. Thank you so much. So I would like to not take too much time for this incredible presentation. We're all here to tell stories. I'm out of my comfort zone. Usually I prepare something and then I get lost in the paper and I get even more flustered and nervous. So my experiment is to just get up here and say what I need to say. But without much ado, I'd like to introduce Linda McInerney, our artistic director, who is my most wonderful creative friend I have. And she is the founder and the executive director of the Deerfield Productions. And if you haven't seen any of her shows, please do. And she's got one coming up called Frankenstein. So without much ado, here is Linda McInerney.
Thank you, Orly. And welcome everybody. Look, everybody's here this morning. It's a little early, but you're doing great. Thanks for getting out of bed. I don't see anybody in their jammy pants. It's great. So welcome to day 2. What we have for you coming up is an amazing collaboration that has happened as you were getting your coffee and as you were getting your bagel, and I bore witness to it, and it's going to be really, really beautiful. So I'm going to read to you the biographies of these 2 amazing human beings. I have to put on my reading glasses though, so you'll let me do that for a second. So Eugene Friesen, who stands before you, is a world-renowned Grammy Award-winning cellist, known for his groundbreaking and improvisational work and long-time work with the Paul Winter Consort. Eugene is a graduate of the Yale School of Music and has been a member of the Paul Winter Consort since 1978, and he performs with Howard Levy and Glenn Velez as Trio Globo. He is a professor at the Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, and lives here in your home. Friesen also runs a nonprofit production company called Sonterra Productions, producing concerts, recordings, and workshops. And he has written and co-authored a book with Wendy Friesen called Improvisation for Classical Musicians, Strategies for Creativity and Expressions. And does that cover us, sweetie? Are we good? More than happy. And then we have our speaker today, who is Charles Eisenstein. We are so proud and honored and humbled to have him here on our stage. So here's what you might like to know about Charles. Charles is a speaker and a writer whose books are The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and I really recommend that one. That one has just come out very recently, and it's so powerful, and you'll never be the same once you drink in those words. He's written The Ascent of Humanity, Sacred Economics, and the Yoga of Eating. He blogs for The Guardian and speaks widely. Charles says that his main interest now is in exploring the boundaries of what is possible according to our received beliefs, received habits, received technologies, and received ways of knowing. Chew on that, babies. For humanity to take that next step, we are going to have to violate what is politically practical, socially practical, and even technologically practical. The same holds on the personal and relational level. I have caught glimpses of the impossible in all these realms, and I am excited about what lies ahead. Welcome, Charles Eisenstein and Eugene Friesen.
Request. Is it possible to turn up the house lights a little bit so I can see faces better? Yeah. Because this isn't like, a performance like a canned thing. Or if it is a performance, it's something that is more of a conversation, even if I'm the one doing most of the talking. Like I still, see faces and get nonverbal communication from that. I thought I'd maybe start by talking about the birds and the bees. I could actually talk about slow sex, but maybe it's too early in the morning for that. I could just change the topic, but actually, one thing I've noticed about both birds and bees is that they're never really in a hurry. Or very busy. Bees are supposed to be the epitome of busyness, right? As busy as a bee. But if you actually look at bees, where I used to live, we had these, like wild bees, wasps probably is what they actually are. They'd build these nests everywhere, on children's swing sets and things like that. And I would sit and watch them. And most of the time, they would just be kind of sitting there. And no, they weren't actually fanning the hive to keep it cool. No, they weren't actually doing sometimes they were, but usually they weren't doing the little communicating bee dance. Most of the time they were just kind of hanging out there. The birds as well. I went with the group to the shore, and we were just there with the seagulls and the other birds. And there they were on their rock, on their perches, just like hours and hours and hours. And occasionally they would fly off and maybe look for food or something like that. But most of the time they were just there. And I thought, why don't I have that freedom, that sense of leisure, that wealth, the abundance of time? After 5,000 years of civilization, can't we do better than that? To always be in a hurry. I realize I'm speaking to the choir here. But that sense of kind of bewilderment never leaves me. And sometimes, I spoke in Vancouver once actually, and I have this experience sometimes, and I had given a talk and stuff, and then like, I had 15 minutes before my interview, or 20 minutes, and there I was, by the bay. For 15 minutes of timelessness. I thought, gotta move on to the next thing. Biologists have trouble, or until very recently have had trouble, accepting that animals spend most of their time really doing nothing productive. So they invent explanations. There they are playing, like the seagulls would play too with each other, you know? Oh, play, that's practicing motor skills in order to better compete for survival. And it's also establishing social dominance, because it really comes down to who gets the crab, you know, when somebody finds a crab or a clam or whatever else they eat, you know. But it's all this kind of transactional interaction to establish social dominance, or to maintain a hierarchy, or to establish territory. Why do the birds sing every morning? Well, they're just either looking for mates or warning each other off their territory, right? They're doing something productive, aren't they? Productive means contributing in some measurable way to their reproductive self-interest. So they have these kind of explanations. I'm not saying that these explanations are false. What I'm saying is that they're a story, a lens, a map. And like any map, they illuminate some features of the terrain and obscure others. Another map might be that all beings love to play, and that the foundation of life is play. And maybe we need to reclaim that foundation of life. Maybe the story that we live in that says that we've come a long way from our animal origins, from being like the birds and the bees. Maybe that story is part of the problem. Maybe we need to learn from them, rather than to complete our transcendence of that world. Maybe we need more stillness, more unproductive activity, more play. My friend Cynthia Jewers does peace work in Africa, and she was in Mali one time and had a conversation with a Dogon elder there. And she said, look what's happening to your land. Look what's happening to the planet. Look at the encroachments. Look at the way that your way of life is being destroyed. Look at the palm oil plantations. Don't you feel urgent to do something about this? And he said, no, urgency isn't something that we have here. Is this just another time where the white man knows best and needs to school the Dogon on how to interact with reality and how to save the world? Or is that just another expression of the same imperialism, the same colonialism that is ruining their land already and ruining the planet? Another way to put it, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, can the master's tools dismantle the master's house? Where does the mentality of busyness and efficiency and maximizing the measurable outcome, where does that come from? It really comes from the money realm. It's the financial way of thinking, where for one thing, time is money. And at any moment, you could be doing something that's productive. You could either be making money or preparing yourself to make money, or even if you're resting, that's in order that you can be more efficient and productive. I don't think that taking that mindset and applying it to something else, such as stopping climate change, is a very deep revolution. Not deep enough. I was speaking on this one time in Florida, and a young man in the group became very agitated. He said, "Charles, how can you say this? How can you advocate anything but the most active, passionate, energized, busy action right now? If there were a child being beaten right there, would you talk about stillness, play? No. We would go do something about that." Well, guess what, Mr. Eisenstein? And guess what, slow-living people? There's a child being beaten right there, but we can't see it. That's what he said. Because he said, "Mr. Eisenstein, you are insulated by your white privilege. But in fact, it's happening. Horrible things are happening. And it's only your white privilege that allows you to sit in this group talking about stillness and play." What I said, or what I would have liked to have said, but actually each time I tell the story, it seems more and more like I actually said this. So let's just rewrite history and say that what I said was, but I think I said something like this actually. I said, the situation isn't like that. It's a false metaphor. If there were a child being beaten right there, we would know exactly what to do. There are 150 of us, one thug. We'd know what to do. But what do you do? What do you do when there's thousands of children being beaten out there by big guys with clubs, and there's just our group of people? What do you do then? The other metaphor that came up was what if the building's on fire? You know, there's a little fire over there. This electronic equipment bursts into flame. You know, oh, I know what to do. I'm going to get the fire extinguisher. You know, and put it out, right? But what do you do when there's the whole building's on fire, and all you have is a little fire extinguisher, and you look outside, and all the buildings in the town are on fire, and the whole world is on fire? Do you then just grab your fire extinguisher and, you know, knowing that you're not gonna, that it's hopeless, futile, and you wade into the inferno, congratulating yourself on how you, at least, are doing something about it? What do you do then? Well, maybe what you do is you go around and you tell everybody. You say, "Hey, guess what, guys? There's children being beaten all over the place. The world is on fire. The climate is running out of, is out of balance. Human trafficking is happening on every continent. 1 in 7 children in America is going hungry tonight." You name your favorite horror. What if you go out and you say that, and people say, "No, it's not." Because if things were really that bad, we'd be doing something about it. If things were really that bad, people wouldn't be walking around as if things were normal. You know, they'd be in an uproar about it. Look, here's the headlines. Kim Kardashian, Kate Middleton, football, basketball. If things were really that bad, the newspaper wouldn't look like this. Have a drink. Have a Prozac. What do you do then? What do you do when any action you can imagine isn't enough? And when you shout the truth from the rooftops, no one listens? What do you do? Thinking about that interaction, a story came to me. It's the story of the man lost in a maze. I think it's where we are as a society, as a civilization. So once upon a time, there was a man lost in a gigantic labyrinth. And it was getting hotter and hotter in the labyrinth, and he was running around looking for the exit. Again and again, hitting dead ends, going in circles, finding himself back at the center again and again. Desperate, increasingly desperate to get out. And a voice in his head said, maybe you just need to stop running. And he said, no. The only way I'm going to get out of here is using my feet. If I stop running, I will never get out of here. I will be making no progress. What I need to do is to run even faster. So he ran even faster. And he thought, I'm really making progress now. Only to find himself yet again in the center of the maze. And he was exhausted, so he stopped. And in that stillness, two things happened. The first is that a pattern to his wanderings became apparent. He realized that there were hidden passageways, secret doors, that he'd run right past. He understood, oh, this is why I've been going in circles. Every time I reach a certain kind of intersection, I always turn right. Every time I reach this other kind of intersection, I always turn left. I'm stuck in my habits. And he began to see a pattern to his wanderings. The second thing that happened as he got quiet was that he heard a sound. He realized that this sound had always been here. But now, for the first time, he heard it clearly. He began to walk, slowly, so as not to miss any of the secret doors and hidden passageways. Walking, very soon reaching the edge of known territory, not getting lost, because he knew the pattern to the maze now. Going through passages he'd never been through before. And soon he reached the limits of his understanding of the maze. And now what? Here's a choice point. Do I turn left or do I turn right? And at those moments, he would pause and get silent and listen. From which passageway is this sound the most beautiful and the clearest? And that's the way he would choose. So, beyond his understanding, he was guided by this music. And eventually he saw light. And he walked out into a radiant world, only to discover that all this time the music was the voice of his lover singing to him. Guiding him, waiting for him, and their reunion. I wrote an article about climate change, which was published in Resurgence magazine. And in the article I said, there's something wrong with the dominant narrative about climate change. It's like the narrative of war, where there's this all-important thing that trumps everything else, renders everything else inconsequential and unimportant. You know, the Huns are coming, the Russians are coming, and everything needs to be sacrificed for the war effort. It's the same mentality as money, actually, where the value of all things is subsumed in a single standard of value that becomes all important. It's similar to the mentality of religion, where again, this all-important final end is what everything needs to be sacrificed for. And some of the responses to the article were actually, I think, in some way validated the point of the article, where they said, Charles, this is dangerous, what you're saying. The only important thing now said the one comment, is tons of CO2. Anything else is inconsequential. Yoga, art, music, slow living. We're not going to have any of that when sea levels rise 30 feet. Community. We need to focus all of our efforts on reducing tons of CO2. That's a measurable quantity. And I could, well, and in the article I kind of did say, I'm not saying that CO2 is irrelevant, but I'm saying that CO2 and the climate more generally is a symptom. It's like a symptomatic fever of an underlying condition. And the underlying condition is precisely the ignoring of the precious, the sacred, the beautiful, and the unmeasurable. When you focus on the numbers and seek to maximize a number, everything that you choose not to measure, that you cannot measure, and that is fundamentally unmeasurable, gets ignored. And we see again and again the consequences of this. I'm really changing course here, but you'll see how it wraps back in. You see the consequences of this when, like in the article I said, well, what about the, can't remember the name of it, this big dam in India, that flooded 100 traditional villages, 100 villages that had been there for 1,000 years, flooded pristine ecosystems, but got carbon credits because, this mega dam was replacing, it was producing as much electricity as 18 coal-fired plants. So based on what you choose to measure, it's a great thing. Same thing with the clear cutting of the Carolina swamp forests. Based on what you choose to measure, hey, this is renewable energy because the trees will grow back, What do you not measure? Well, maybe you don't measure biodiversity when the trees that grow back are just this, tree farm, a monoculture or something like that. But what you choose to measure is being reduced. And so there's a problem here, because actually you end up making the situation worse. In the case of the dam, it's not that it's replacing coal-fired plants, it's actually contributing to industrialization, which will end up creating more demand for electricity as all the traditional villagers have to move out of their subsistence, sustainable, ecological farming practices, and move into concrete buildings in the slum where they become consumers and workers in the industrial economy, growing that economy and causing more demand for electricity, right? Like, you could improve the measurements and say, well, you didn't take this into account. And you didn't take into account the fact that a mature biodiverse forest sequesters more carbon than a tree farm, and you didn't, so one conclusion is that your measurements just aren't good enough. And that our program, and this is the program of science, and to some extent of industrial civilization, our program to rule the world by quantifying and measuring everything just needs to go a little bit farther. We need to be more scientific about it. We have to measure even more of these variables, and then our calculus of greenhouse gas reduction will be the accurate guide out of our maze, out of the labyrinth that we find ourselves stuck in. And my point was, maybe the problem is a lot deeper than that. Maybe the problem isn't that we haven't perfected our measurement and control and prediction of the world, our ability to engineer reality. Maybe the problem is in that whole mindset itself. Maybe we're running around in circles. Maybe there are some things that are beyond measurement. Maybe the way of making decisions and the path to knowledge, our way of knowing, that's founded on a belief in an objective, measurable, quantifiable universe outside of us. Maybe that's part of the problem. After all, we're the only civilization, the only society on Earth that's ever existed that really believes in that mythology. Maybe the problem is in our mythology, in our basic answers to what's the nature of the world, what's the nature of the self, who are you, why are we here, where do we come from, where are we going? Like these answers, maybe we're on the wrong track. Maybe the birds and the bees know more about it than we do. Maybe the Dogon understand better than we do. Maybe we need to learn from them. Maybe we need to stop. Maybe we need to slow down. How do we know which actions will save the world? Our mythology tells us what's important and valuable and what is not. I met a young man recently, who spent a year as a volunteer at a Steiner community, Camp Hill, where they work with severely disabled children. And he spent most of his time working with just one young man, one teenager, who had a severe neurological condition. Couldn't really walk, couldn't dress himself, couldn't do anything. He could move, but it was very jerky. He couldn't control his gross motor movements, except when this volunteer was playing the guitar for him. Then he could walk. Recorded music wouldn't do it. He had to be playing the guitar for him. So he spent a good part of a year playing the guitar for this young man. What a waste of time. What a waste of time. It's not going to contribute to stopping climate change, is it? What about working with the homeless? Waste of time. In fact, counterproductive, because if your work is successful, they will join society, become productive, consumptive. I cannot abide a universe in which what that young volunteer did doesn't matter. I cannot abide a universe where what he did is less important than what Bill McKibben is doing. The small invisible acts of care that get devalued in our mythology are actually what holds the world together. And the mentality that ignores and devalues those things is the same mentality that ignores and devalues the forests, the streams, the rocks, the mountains, the sky, the earth. And instead says, these things are valuable only for their instrumental utility, only for their use to us. In fact, most climate change arguments come from this place. Why should you care? Why should you care? Well, because if you don't, we're not going to have a planet to live on. Its value is in terms of its use to us. This is not what most people on Earth believed. They believed that nature, land, animals, plants, water, rocks, clouds, the soil, the sun, had beingness. They had a value in their own right. They were a self, just as we are a self. If I manipulated you for my instrumental utility, if I used you as an instrument of my gain, with no concern for your well-being, treating you as not a self, you would call me an asshole. What allows us to do exactly that with the planet? It's not because we're not smart enough and haven't calculated the effect it will have on us. It's not that we are myopic, as we are sometimes taught by the environmental movement. The fundamental problem is that we do not see that outside of ourselves as a self, with the properties of a self, like consciousness, intelligence, purpose, beingness, sentience. Divested from those qualities, it's insane, irrational to treat a rock as anything but some stuff. It's irrational to love the planet, because there's nothing to love there. It's like a child loving his teddy bear. You know, we grow out of that, don't we? And realize that that's just an anthropomorphic projection. Oh, the teddy bear is tired, the teddy bear is hungry, I'm gonna feed the teddy bear. Yeah, ha ha ha, very nice. But we grow out of that. We grow out of anthropomorphic projection. We grow out of thinking that the stuff out there has beingness. We grow out of it as individuals, and we've grown out of it as a civilization. That's primitive superstition. That's maybe what the Dogon believe. That's what the Yanomami believe. But we've grown out of that. How do we know that we're right and they're wrong? Well, just look how successful we are. Look at the glorious society we've built from our ways of knowing. Well, you see a little problem here, don't you? 50 years ago, that was a compelling argument. Because it looked like we were on the way to a perfect society, that things were getting better and better. But today it's falling apart. My son said, he's 17, he said, you know, Dad, almost every single one of my friends is depressed. I'm like the only happy one. And they think it's normal to be like that. Fortunately, we no longer have to be irrational or unscientific to think that the world outside of ourselves has the properties of aliveness, beingness, intelligence. That understanding is breaking out everywhere. We're becoming more receptive to it as the world that we live in falls apart, that as the mythology that we've lived in, the mythology of dominance and control, measuring and quantifying, making decisions based on the measurable, predictable outcomes, the technologies of mastery as these stop working, the technology we call money, the agreement that we call money, the story that we call money falls apart. As our civilization stops working, as the absurdity grows, as life on an individual level in one way or another falls apart despite playing by all the rules, going to the doctor when you're supposed to go to the doctor, getting your diagnostic exams, working hard, getting good grades, going to a good college, building your resume, playing by all the rules, and you're supposed to end up in this paradise of financial security and happiness and independence and health. And instead, you end up in constant anxiety, insecurity, and breakdown. And so as people go through this process, they become more receptive to the idea that the problem goes all the way down to the bottom. And they become more receptive to what I would call a new and ancient mythology that explains this feeling that probably we all have, that these small invisible acts are important and significant and in some way are holding the world together. And even though we can't yet explain how, we can't explain how working with the homeless or playing the guitar for a disabled child is important. And I don't mean important as in like some spiritual sense that has nothing to do with the world. I mean important in every sense, contributing to the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. We can't rationally explain how we know that yet because our story says that it is inconsequential. Our story, our mythology, what we live in, our explanation of cause and effect, our system of causality, our understanding of how the world works. But that's all based on an obsolete mythology. It's becoming obsolete, even in science. It's been obsolete for 90 years, really. Physicists, they try to obscure this. They try to kind of paper over this glaring exception to the idea that everything happens because of a cause. A uranium atom, you could have two identical uranium atoms and one of them decays and one of them doesn't. Yet the totality of forces on each of them are the same. And they say, well, it's just random, it's acausal. A hunter-gatherer would say, well, this one chose to decay and that one didn't. Because of course, they have beingness, they have choice, they have intelligence. So this understanding is growing that, and I'll call it the new and ancient mythology. And people, am I getting a little bit boring here? No. Okay. All right. Just checking in here. I mean, all right. Okay. So it's just like there's a lot of different threads that I try to weave together, and sometimes it gets disjointed. So. Yeah, a new and ancient mythology, which answers these questions in a different way. These questions, who are you? No longer a separate self in a universe of other whose well-being depends on insulating yourself from that other, protecting yourself and controlling the world around you, because after all, it's just a bunch of stuff. No longer. Instead, it says, and can I say this without being trite in this audience, that who we are interconnected beings, that we're interbeings, that everything that happens in the world mirrors something happening in ourselves, that every relationship that you have is an expression of something inside, that everything that's happening out there is happening to us. And maybe that's why all of my son's friends are depressed, because it's so painful being in a world where the things that are happening are happening. It's so painful and we don't even know where the pain comes from. It's ambient. So we think that it's normal to be depressed. We think that the default state of existence is anxiety and discomfort. That makes total sense as interbeings. And it makes total sense, of course. Everything that we do has cosmic significance because what happens in one place is happening every place. Rupert Sheldrake talks about this, morphic resonance. So, which says that anything that happens in one place, a change that happens here, creates a field of change or strengthens a field of change that allows that same thing to happen everywhere else, just this more easily. Even if nobody finds out about it. Now, I'm not saying to stop your efforts to reduce tons of CO2. What I'm saying is that these efforts ultimately come from the same place as the tiny acts of care. Really, I'm just validating what everybody knows. In those moments of care, you know that this is the most important thing in the world right now. I heard a story on Snap Judgment. It's an NPR program. This guy, when he was 9 years old, well, his parents had been fighting a lot. And he said, I remember the shouting that night. I remember the glass breaking. That wasn't unusual. I don't remember the gunshots. But then I do remember my father shouting on the telephone. An intruder's come in and killed my wife. Shouting again and again and again. Someone's killed my wife. And the kid went downstairs and there was blood everywhere. And he ran upstairs to his sister's room and just held his sister. And the police came and arrested his father and took him away. His father had stolen a gun from a neighbor and shot his wife, shot the kid's mother. So he was brought up by his grandparents. He was an orphan then, brought up by his grandparents, and he turned into a bad kid, acting out. He said I was a manipulative monster, using my tragedy to get anything I wanted, from a cookie to affection to anything, stealing, getting involved in drugs as he grew older. And there were two men, though, that he idolized, that became kind of father figures to him, his uncles, his mother's brothers. Lee and Brian, their names were. Lee was a biker, big long beard, long ponytail, tattoos, grimy, like a motorcycle outlaw kind of guy who went by the name of Panhead because he drove a 1952 Panhead Harley Davidson. His other uncle, Brian, was a coke dealer, but he idolized these men. They were like gods to him, and their only flaw was that they weren't there often enough. He grew older, early 20s, his life spiraling downward. And at one point, at a moment of despair, I guess, he called his Uncle Lee, said, "You've got to tell me, is there anything I don't know about my parents? What happened that night?" And Lee said, "Well, there is one detail I've never shared with you or with anybody. shortly after your mother's murder, I was at a road stop, a biker bar, and 4 tough-looking outlaws came up to me. They weren't even looking at me. They were kind of looking at the ground, shuffling toward me, and I thought, oh shit. They might kill me from a different gang. And they said, Pan, we want to talk to you. So he grabs his Jack Daniels bottle, follows them into another room, ready to break it and fight them with it. But no, they just want to talk to them. They say, Pan, we heard what happened to your sister. And, you know, biker to biker, we'd like to offer you a gift. We have guys on the inside in prison where the murderer is. Could be happy to rub him out for a carton of cigarettes. That's how much his life is worth to them. You want us to arrange that for you? And Lee said, I'm gonna have to talk to my brother about this. So he goes and has a meeting with Brian and lays out the scenario, and Brian says, and Brian is motivated because the night his mother was murdered, or his sister was murdered, she called him and said, I think my husband's gonna kill me, you've gotta get me out of here. And he was drunk, he was like, yeah, sis, you know, it'll be fine. So he's been tormented by guilt the whole time. But he looks at Lee and he says, you know, neither of us are good men, but I think we're better than that. This was a decision totally invisible. At that moment, it seemed it would having him killed would have no consequence. It would never get back to them, they'd have revenge. But 15 years later, when he told that story to the kid, now grown up, it changed his life. We're better men than that. And he thought, yeah, maybe I'm not a very good man, but I can make something of my life too. And he got his act together. And built, he said, a life that he could be proud of. And when a girlfriend's family or somebody asked him, how did you, given what happened as a child, how did you, what happened that allowed you to become successful and happy? And he said, it was because my uncles decided that they were better men than that. So any act that we commit pulls on a thread that might go deep underground and come up somewhere very far away, but it tugs on reality. Sometimes we can see how it changes reality, but other times we cannot. Sometimes it fits into our story of the world, into our understanding of causality, but sometimes it does not. The mind of interbeing knows that any act that we do will tug on reality in some way. Therefore, we orient no longer to the calculable, predictable effects of something. Like, well, it's all fine to make beautiful music, but it's only going to change the world if I record it and spread it. And my impact on the world will be measured by how many copies are sold. But what about the power of serenading just one person? Do we ignore that? How do we know when we're doing something slowly that we're really being slow? How do we know when we're doing something fast that we're really being fast? There's a calculus here of efficiency. If you're doing it fast, you're producing more of the measurable. When you're doing it slow, you might be producing more of the unmeasurable, or of the things we choose not to measure that we cannot see. Which means we need to be guided by something else if we are to escape the maze. I like to say that we should be guided by beauty. Our understanding of beauty doesn't ignore the measurable. The more that we learn about the world, where things come from, where they go to, what's in a cell phone, the rare earth minerals, the embodied energy, where the energy comes from, and so on and so forth, the more that we expand our view and our understanding, an expansion which uses the technologies of measurement, then the more our understanding of what's beautiful changes. So I'm not putting beauty out there as some separable, non-material thing. But I guess I'm saying that we need to trust that our orientation to what's beautiful will also, as a side effect, tug on reality in ways that we do not know. I oppose mountaintop removal because it's ugly. It offends me, it hurts. Same thing with tar sands removal, same thing with offshore oil drilling, like the oil spills that happen, they're ugly. You know? Every single thing that you can oppose on climate change grounds mars this sacred being. I guess what I would like to, maybe I'll just kind of end with this thought. No, I won't, because there's something else I wanted to read here. I wanted to read it earlier, but it's a little out of place right now, but it's still so powerful and relevant. It's by, how do you say that Brazilian, the large Brazilian tribe, the Yanomami? Something like that. He's known as, this guy, Davi Kopenawa is known as the Dalai Lama of the rainforest. And here's his message to us. The forest is alive. It can only die if the white people persist in destroying it. If they succeed, the rivers will disappear underground. The soil will crumble. The trees will shrivel up, and the stones will crack in the heat. The dried up earth will become empty and silent. The Japiri spirits who come down from the mountains to play on their mirrors in the forest will escape far away. Their shaman fathers will no longer be able to call them and make them dance to protect us. They will be powerless to repel the epidemic fumes which devour us. They will no longer be able to hold back the evil beings who will turn the forest to chaos. We will die, one after the other, the white people as well as us. All the shamans will finally perish. Then, if none of them survive to hold it up, the sky will fall. Ho, 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 those primitive savages. They think that the sky could fall. We need to improve on their knowledge and their ways of knowing Japiri spirits. Playing in the mirrors of the forest. We know better than them, don't we? And when the sky does fall, we would say, well, that's not really the sky falling, that's just a breakdown in the homeostatic maintenance of the atmosphere. I guess what I'm saying is, like the man in the maze, our hopelessness and exhaustion has brought us to a point of healing, a point of empty space, a point of receptivity, a point of the breakdown of our stories, of our meaning. Many of us go through this on a personal level. It's happening now on a collective level too, just starting to happen. Not quite yet. People in general are still clinging to our old systems of meaning, our old stories. The story of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, for example. The story of technological utopia, the story of economic growth. And the powers, the structures, the institutions that maintain that story are stronger than ever they seem on the surface, more frozen in place than ever. And it looks more hopeless than ever. But they are hollowing out from the inside. Even the elites no longer believe their own propaganda. Nobody wholeheartedly participates in this. It's a game that everybody plays and no one believes, which means it doesn't take much for it to collapse. Many of us are anticipating this by going through this breakdown early. And it's a process. The old story falls apart. You enter the space between stories, where you don't know how things work anymore. You don't know who you are anymore. You don't even know what's real anymore. And then, from that empty space, a new story is born. I guess I'm just here to remind you what you already know is true. Because if you are one of these people who is prematurely birthed into a new story, the surrounding narrative will tell you that you're kind of crazy for doing the things that you do. You need an ally. You need someone to say, you were right all along. You were doing something important. Even if it was spending 10 years taking care of your aging mother, none of your siblings would help. They were out doing important things and big things. Writing a book, starting a school, making a movie, campaigning, or more likely building a career. But they were doing the big things and you were in this invisible position of thankless care. But there's another logic that validates those things, which, by the way, are usually done by women. There's a whole patriarchal aspect to this. And I guess I want to add my voice to validating that and say that we are being born into a story of interbeing, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's phrase, a story of interbeing, in which our heart's logic that says, I know that this is important, no longer is in conflict with the mind's logic, which tries to fit it into a story of the world. The story we've grown up in, going back to the time of Galileo, says only the measurable is real, and progress of knowledge means that we will measure more and more things. But by doing that, we've excluded huge swaths of reality. So, we're not being impractical here. Let's just put it that way. And I think maybe I'll just, we'll just enjoy a short musical commentary on that idea. And then maybe, I don't know how much time we have here. I know we've got a tight schedule here at the Slow Living Conference. But I feel like I maybe went on too long, but I'd like while you listen to the
Tell you,
next.
Charles, that you have 15 full minutes.
Beautiful.
We can change the world in
15 long minutes.
Yes, baby.
So let any questions or comments brew as you listen for a couple minutes to Eugene, and then speak from what wants to be said. So I thought I could take some questions, and the ones I can't answer, I'll turn over to Eugene. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Just lady here.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was really amazing. The question that's persisted in my mind throughout your talk is, I'm curious about any practices you have in your daily life that you can speak to that help you to stay as clear as you were this moment about, or this morning, about what you feel to be true. I resonated with it, and yet on a moment-by-moment basis, I'm constantly tugged by the threads of mass consciousness and the mind systems. You know where I'm going, so I'd love to hear about your practices.
Okay, good. Love this question. This is the answer is going to be very counterintuitive, but hopefully also very intuitive. Yeah, next question. No, just kidding. Yeah. It actually doesn't start with practices. The way to stay sane, the way to stay in the new story, the new and ancient story, is with help. Like what enables me to stay clear, what enables me to stand and speak from the place I'm speaking at, which by the way is not a place I'm standing all the time by any means, but I get enough help staying here to be able to bring other people into this space as well. But it's not like I did it through my own efforts. It's not like I sat and meditated in a cave for 20 years and I tried harder. My yearning for enlightenment was greater, and my willpower was greater, and my commitment and dedication was greater, my courage, my heroism was greater, and I, this superior being, have done it, and now I shall bring you there. It wasn't through my efforts. So if I give you any prescription that says, okay, here's what you have to do, and if you do it, you're going to get here, and if you don't do it, you're not going to get here, I'm actually setting up a subtle kind of spiritual hierarchy, which then gets applied as judgment to other people, the people who aren't getting it, the people who they just haven't even tried, you know? They just haven't even thought about it. You know, they're just closed-minded. This is part of the problem. This paradigm that says that there are, you know, there's like the spectrum of virtue. Some people are good, some people are medium, some people are bad, and people who are not on our side, people who deny climate change, you know, the people who, you know, vote for the Tea Party and the Koch brothers and Monsanto executives and all these people, they are deficient in some fundamental quality of humanness. And therefore, these people have to be stopped and have to be conquered. This is part of the old story. The war against the other. Victory through conquest. And it's, like you were saying, it's programmed into the mass culture on a very deep level. Every action movie you ever see, with very, very few exceptions, has the same plot, which is that an inexplicably evil person or other evil entity is you know, causing harm, and the solution is to overcome, conquer, humiliate, and usually kill that evil person. Problem solved. Dr. No, the evil lion and the Lion King, the evil general in Avatar, you know, like very, very few exceptions. The Lego movie is one beautiful exception, actually. What's that? Fifth sacred thing. There are some exceptions, yeah. But anyway, so then we tend to apply this to ourselves. And okay, there are other kinds of practices. I don't want to, like, you know, say that there's no place for practice. But I guess what I would say is that what wants to happen in you is happening already. It will generate practices, and it will grow in you. And you will, as it grows in you, you will become more and more of an agent to bring other people into it as well. So it's part of it is like kind of a deprogramming from the habits of doing as applied to spiritual practice. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you if there's some way of getting you to the Republican convention. Preaching to the choir, but how do we get you in front of the non-choir?
Okay. Yeah, and this is not just a question for me, of course.
Or the Democratic.
Yeah. I am speaking at the Green Party convention. Does that count? Yeah, actually, I would feel probably more comfortable speaking at the Republican convention than the Democratic convention, to the extent that there's some people who are a bit more kooky and less invested in what the dominant culture calls rational and true. But, so first let me say, yeah, I was being polite. But first let me say that not to underestimate the importance of speaking to the choir. Because, for one thing, we need the choir to make beautiful music together, to draw other people in. When the world falls apart for somebody, they need a place to go, and our music draws them. When the world hasn't fallen apart yet, when the rules of the game are working for them, there's almost nothing you can do. You're not going to persuade them through force of logic to change their mind. Creating change through force, which is not, I'm not going to discard that entirely, but it's part of the old story. Change happens through the application of a force. So in physics, you know, a mass only changes its course when a force is exerted upon it. And then we kind of apply that to other realms and say, well, how do you make change happen? How do you make the government change its policies? How do you make something happen? How do you change those inexplicably evil people in charge of everything? Well, you have to exert pressure. There's another physical metaphor. You have to wage a campaign. Or you use psychological force or financial force. You bribe them into doing it, you shame them into doing it, guilt them into doing it, say that you will get PR benefits by doing it, and so on. You will get acceptance and approval. You get to join the in-group if you ride a bike and drive a Prius instead of an SUV. Okay? So where I'm going with this, though, as far as, there you have your Tea Party uncle or somebody like that, or your Republican convention. They are perhaps not done with the story that has carried civilization for a long time and that is still working for them in their lives. But that story cannot last unless you believe that you can have infinite growth on a finite planet, unless you believe that we can eventually encompass all things in the program of measurement and control. Unless you believe all of these precepts of the old story, their story is going to break down through whatever kind of crisis. Could be a health crisis, could be a financial crisis, a marital crisis, could be a teenager crisis, something is going to break down. And at that point, reality begins to unravel, and then they might be receptive. Until that happens, all you can do is to offer them data points that weaken the foundation of their story. Fundamentally, the story is the story of separation. That's the idea that you're a separate self in an indifferent or hostile universe of other, that you need to control things. It's a story of fear. US foreign policy is based on fear. Our prison system is based on fear. Our medical system is based on fear. All of that is based on fear and separation and isolation. And that means, well, in my book I write a lot about disrupting the story as like a foundational precept of activism, as like a fundamental strategy, disrupting the story. In interpersonal relationships, you can do that too. So anytime you offer somebody, this relates to the other question as well, as a practice, to offer somebody an experience that doesn't fit into the world of the separate self, you're weakening the foundation of the story. Like an experience of forgiveness, for example, or unconditional love, or generosity, something like that. It just Like, it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Like, you can do this if you're staying in a motel. If you leave a $20 tip with a nice note, like, that doesn't fit into the story that the cleaning lady is living in, perhaps. And I'm not saying that that's a substitute for direct political action and things like that. But it is no less important either. If I were speaking to the Republican convention, and I might have opportunities to do something like this at some point. I mean, I do have evangelical friends and stuff, you know, and I try to translate. I guess well, it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish, but one thing I've been working with. Well, for one thing, I'll use language that avoids political trigger words. And I'll try to translate things into their language in a way that shows the contradictions that are inherent in their narrative. So here's just one I'll offer you. So what about the Christians who say, well, the Bible gives us license, says the earth is ours, and be fruitful and multiply, you know, and do anything you want to it. And besides, God's going to take it back soon anyway and destroy the world in fire. So what I'll say is did we earn this world, or did God give it to us as a gift? Which one? Did we earn it? And they have to admit that it was a gift. I say, well, suppose you give somebody a gift, a beautiful drawing that you've made, and then you go to your house and you find that it's been used as a bib for the baby, or it's sitting in the toilet with shit all over it. You know, how are you going to feel when your gift has been dishonored and insulted? How we treat the gift insults or honors the giver. There's no way around that. And like, so that's like, yeah.
Magical 10 o'clock. So that's our last thought. But I do want to let everyone know that if you want to continue this amazing conversation with Charles in a half an hour, he's going to be right here. So this can go on. And also you need to know that Eugene Friesen will be offering a breakout session in just a half an hour over at the Marlboro Graduate Center. So let's just give one more offering of gratitude for the gift that we've just received. Thank you. Like to say is the books that you have heard from the heart of Charles are all for sale out in the lobby, and I have a little gift for you guys. So remember the thread that we had last night that we all held together? Last night and this morning I made you a little bracelet from that same thread. So everyone, you can know that the volunteers out there as you walk into the lobby, they have them all, and just make sure that you get your little bracelet and have someone you love tie it on your wrist, and you'll be connected to one another through the whole summit. Great, thank you so much, everybody.